All right, and we're live.
We're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the George Poo Show. We took a nice 3-week break just to prepare the best content and strategies for the podcast, and really excited to kick off this new era of the show with you guys. Today, as usual, with us, Matt and Soham. How's everything with your, work and life recently?
It's good, man. There's lots happening in my space recently. I think there's been a lot of controversy like in Bitcoin lately, so we'll get into that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Soham, what do you have?
Yeah, man. For me, it's just been like really busy at work so far. But I'm interested to hear a bit more about the controversies.
Yeah. Well, we've got NFTs coming to Bitcoin, and so everyone's kind of been up in arms about that. So for those of you who don't know, like what is an NFT? First off, NFT is an image that is put on a blockchain, and people can pay for it, right? So it's supposed to be unique. It's supposed to be a unique place on the blockchain where that image lives, and people can pay money for it. And during the last bull market, people were paying millions of dollars for these images that you can right click and save.
Yeah, that was my biggest problem with it. Like, why are you buying something that's on the cloud? Like, is it original, or can you just create something that's like similar to like popular photographs, and you just like save it, have multiple duplicates of that same image on the NFT?
Well, you can absolutely. Well, I think one of the purposes that the artists claim was this is an ability for an artist to be able to like monetize their work in the digital space more effectively. But part of the problem there is you can just right click and save it. You can upload it to the same blockchain, or you can upload it to a different blockchain. One of the things that was kind of fortunate was this, at least that Bitcoiners felt in the Bitcoin space, is this wasn't really possible, or you could always upload images to Bitcoin in general, or some type of data, but there wasn't kind of this prominent idea of the transferability of images, essentially, in the form of an NFT. So what does an NFT stand for? NFT stands for non-fungible token. So what is a fungible token? A fungible token is like digital USD, right? So if I send money from my bank account to yours, and then you send it to George, then you're not going to look at it and say, oh, it's from that. I can trace that, and so this is more or less valuable, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what fungible means. Non-fungible means that it's basically there are differences between them. So and a good example of this would like an art piece. It's obviously like non-fungible because there's only one Mona Lisa in the world, for example. Yeah. And so what exists here with NFTs coming to Bitcoin is now, for the first time, you could always put images on the Bitcoin blockchain. But this is the first time that you can actually transfer them. Someone came up with a way to be able to actually figure out exactly on the Bitcoin blockchain where each Bitcoin is stored, essentially. And then you can use that in order to enable transferability of it. What's recently happened is this has resulted in a significant amount of data being put onto the Bitcoin blockchain, which is bloating it significantly. We had a block a couple days ago where so the maximum size of a Bitcoin block is 4 megabytes right now. And I think it was like 3.92 megabytes of that was an image, right? Which is insane. Okay. And this becomes like a big problem because one of the issues with Bitcoin right now is obviously scalability. There's not enough space on the Bitcoin chain for everyone to have a Bitcoin, to have a transaction, to have a private key. And now that problem is getting worse now that we have NFTs come to the space, and those are starting to use up an increasing amount of block space. So, instead of it being a situation where, we're keeping the block small and everyone can run their own node, now we're running into a situation where, by 2032, the size of the Bitcoin blockchain is going to be 2.5 terabytes, which is very concerning. So I don't know where this leads. There's a lot of talk about is this a feature or a bug, right? When you're a programmer and you write code, you expect that code to be used a certain way. And in this instance, in my opinion, an edge case was found, right? Where you figured out how to take advantage of certain elements in the code to be able to basically you've been able to find like certain elements in the code that allows you to basically take advantage of certain features of Bitcoin to put NFTs on there. And so now the question is this a feature or is this a bug? And I think that's really what's up for debate.
Yeah, and before we go any further, like explain to, I guess I'm curious about why Bitcoin, the blockchain being 2.9 TB is an issue. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key characteristics of Bitcoin and one of the kind of founding principles is don't trust, verify. So anything that occurs on the chain itself, I should be able to verify what's occurring. If you want to build a system where fraud doesn't occur, if you don't want fraud to occur, build a system where fraud cannot occur, right? Okay. So you should be able to verify each piece of it. And one of the nice things is I can go directly from the latest Bitcoin block. I can go all the way back to the first transaction that ever occurred, and I can validate all of them.
Yeah.
And so that's why the concept of being able to run your own. So what is a full node? A full node is simply being able to run downloading the entire history of the entire Bitcoin blockchain since Genesis, since 2009, and being able to validate all of those, and then also continuously validate transactions as they come in. And so the importance of this is, if it becomes too difficult to be able to do that, then your average person isn't going to be running their own full node, right? And a good example of this is Ethereum, where there isn't a block size limit, and your average person is no longer able to run their own full archive node, essentially. And so your average person doesn't run their own node at home, and they rely on kind of these centralized providers to be able to get access to blockchain data, which makes it much more centralized. So in order to keep it decentralized, you want to keep the block sizes in general small enough such that technology is able to advance fast enough to keep up with the increasing block sizes.
Okay.
So the worry here is, okay, so say tomorrow we increase the block size to 16 megabytes. And then suddenly, the size of the Bitcoin blockchain quadruples in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Well, now your average person isn't able to do it because now it's very expensive to buy a bunch of, several terabyte hard drives and then run that at home. But we hope, the hope is, once it hits 2.5 terabytes, which is what's estimated by 2032, that the cost of those hard drives will be low enough such that it's still reasonable to be able to run your own full node. So it's always this balance between technological advance, basically, and scaling Bitcoin at the same time, and making sure that there's that people are able to be onboarded. But so that's essentially the debate. Yeah.
I guess how much of that doesn't matter for the NFT part to actually pick up? Let's just say no one even cares about the fact that your Bitcoin can do that. Would the storage need to increase? Because the NFT.
Wait, can you repeat that? So...
assume that even though now has the capability to do it, if no one really cares to do it anymore, because the NFT market itself is kind of simmered down a lot. Would that still increase the storage just because has capability, or it's only if it's the use case of it starts going?
It's only if it's used.
Yeah.
Right. So it's also it's interesting. It's also a social aspect.
Yeah.
Right. So there's certain Bitcoiners out there that are pushing, hey, don't do this. This is a sin, in the Bitcoin world, which is kind of funny. We're dealing with code, but so yeah, if people don't use it, then it's not really an issue. It's if people use it, because I think before it was just you were able to put images on the blockchain, but there wasn't really any incentive to do that because you couldn't transfer ownership, right? You couldn't transfer ownership to someone else. But now that you can transfer ownership, you've created a marketplace, right? And now that you've got a marketplace in place, now it becomes much more easier much more justified for people to say, hey, if I can put this amount of data on the blockchain, well, then I can go sell that for 1 Bitcoin, right? And there's a lot more incentive to do that now. So I think that's the main concern. NFTs have simmered down dramatically in this bear market, but obviously we're kind of in the middle of the bear market, moving towards probably a bull market in maybe 2015. And if this is one of the features that is there in that bull market, I could see a future where we see a significant increase in the amount of NFTs being created over the next 2 years as we move into that bull like and we have crazy fees on the base layer of Bitcoin that gets created.
Yeah, that'd be interesting because I know in terms traditionally how NFTs kind of were the digital version of Mona Lisa and all these art pieces. Yeah, a lot of it was for that tax loss harvesting and things like that, where you kind of just try to write down taxes. So that could be kind of a use case in that.
Tax harvesting is a use case of NFTs. Yeah, I guess so. But see, my perspective is I'm running a full node at home, and so I have to download your images because you're doing tax, right? So it's oh, god damn it.
What does it mean moving forward for the Bitcoin community? Is there any proposal to stop it? But because I guess you can't really stop it. So what is it gonna be like?
So there was, it's interesting because now, so there was 2 elements that enabled this. There was the upgrade to Bitcoin called SegWit, which was done back in 2017,
Okay.
which essentially increased the block size limit from 1 megabyte to 4 megabytes.
Okay.
And then there was another change, which was Taproot, which I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. And essentially, what it did is it removed the limits on the transaction data that can be included in each transaction that goes through. So the combination. And by the way, SegWit also decreased the cost of putting that on-chain data by 75%. So you've got basically a decrease in the cost of being able to put this data on, and you've increased the limits that allows for people now to put this data on chain. Mm-hmm. And so with that in place now, now people are talking about, oh, we should reverse Taproot. Okay, well that doesn't solve it because you can still do it with SegWit. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to reverse Taproot and you're going to reverse SegWit? Well, that doesn't seem like a good solution. And the other thing too is now there's a discussion happening that the Bitcoin Core, the Bitcoin maximalists want censorship because people find that some Bitcoiners were talking about, if we just get the miners to censor this transaction or don't allow this garbage in there, then it won't go through. And that's cause for them to say, Bitcoiners want censorship, right? Which is I think is not the right way to look at it. It's simply like Bitcoin's code is intended for a specific purpose, and there was an edge case found in that code, and now it's being used for something else. So there was already a proposal by Luke Dash Jr., which is one of the Bitcoin core devs, and he his initial thing was to put filters. So he created like some example code filters for filtering out basically NFT data or like kind of data being pushed to the stack of Bitcoin. Okay. But now there's people are talking about should we undo basically the witness basically the discount that exists for that data, and should we put limits in place for the amount of data that can be put on chain? So those are some of the discussions that are happening right now. Honestly, everything is up in the air. There's a lot of fighting in between the two groups that are pro essentially NFTs on Bitcoin and against NFTs on Bitcoin. And I mean, this is just going to be another history. In Bitcoin, it's going to be another war. Essentially, is the way I see it.
Yeah. And how do you make those proposals, by the way? Because I know the original author of Bitcoin, he's not here to make those changes. How are those changes implemented and voted for?
Yeah. Oh, that is a huge can of worms. so that's a question of Bitcoin governance, right? So how is Bitcoin governance done? How do changes get into Bitcoin? There's no kind of core person that determines when these changes should occur. So if you look at other chains like Ethereum, for example, they have the Ethereum Foundation, and basically the Ethereum Foundation, if Vitalik says, hey, this change should go through, that change usually goes through, and they can make hard forks, and usually everyone is kind of aligned on that because there's one person to look towards.
Right.
That's you could see that as a feature, or you could see that as a very large bug, because that means that you kind of have central control that can change the underlying chain. So you don't have that in Bitcoin. But what that means is that there's a lot of contention when it comes to introducing new changes, because you need to have a large amount of consensus from a large number of people. So a good example of that was generally the way that these proposals get made is there's some type of author of some type of code that's created, and then that gets put up, and that doesn't mean it goes through, right? The code is written for it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be pushed through. You need to have a ton of reviews that occur of that code, and then the entire community needs to discuss it for months and months and months and months and months to find all the possible problems, remove any possible problems with it, and then even when you have a change that everybody agrees on, they usually don't agree on how to activate it, right? So even with the most recent one, which is Taproot, everyone kind of agreed on the set of changes that were being introduced. There was Peter Woolley, who was the author of the Taproot code changes, and everyone agreed on the code changes that were being made, but they were disagreeing on how it should be activated. And so, I don't think Bitcoin governance has been figured out, right? I think we're still we're still experimenting with different things to figure out how to do this. It's how do you bring a group of how do you basically make changes to a system that is supposed to have no central control, right? Yeah. And there's no really good way to do that. And no one's going to be happy with the end result. Okay. So I don't know what's going to happen with the next one, or how we're there's a lot of debate around how we should do this moving forward. I don't think there's a good answer.
Mm-hmm. And how's the implication of this to the broader crypto Web3 community? Are people now saying Ethereum might be a better alternative, or you don't see that happening?
I think there's likely a lot of folks from like Bitcoiners are seeing that there's a lot of folks from kind of altcoin world or from Web3 that are now, that might be coming over to Bitcoin, and they might not be happy about that. So we'll see how that plays out if this feature or bug, whatever you want to call it, stays within Bitcoin. Then I think we're going to see a lot of folks that were in the NFT marketplace in Ethereum during the bull market there, might come over to Bitcoin and start doing stuff here, which obviously bloats the chain. There's a lot of problems with that. So I think that's been the influence from the rest of the community. But other than that, there hasn't really been much. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Makes sense. Maybe we can kind of segue to the next part about the blockchain, about
scaling or
about Nostr, right?
Nostr. Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, did you guys hear that? Have you guys heard about Nostr actually? It's basically a decentralized Twitter clone in essence.
Mm-hmm.
So Nostr has come out. So if you guys know Twitter, where do your tweets actually lie? They lie in a database.
Yeah.
But what's really cool about Nostr is the idea of creating kind of I guess not decentralized, but a distributed kind of alternative to Twitter that allows for all of the tweets that you create, or as they're called, events, okay, to be a protocol essentially. So the idea is you can have a protocol that has all these relays that relays these events, and then you have interfaces that can be built on top of this.
Yeah.
So we've recently had, if you guys know, there's an app called Damus, Damus, recently got on the App Store 3 days ago. 156 downloads in the last 3 days, which is huge. And it's essentially censorship resistant, right? Because it's built on top of an underlying protocol that is censorship resistant. Whenever you connect to the app, it connects to 4 different relays that relays all of the tweets or events that are going back and forth. And so I think this is really huge to see that there's now finally an alternative to Twitter that is a protocol that is actually taking off. And Jack Dorsey actually put money towards it. He funded it with Bitcoin. And so it's kind of interesting to see one of the founders of Twitter actually putting money towards an alternative. So
I guess the protocol, is there someone that can edit the protocol itself for kind of censorship and stuff like that, or is it completely censorized?
Yeah, well I think it's on a relay by relay basis, right? So whoever is running a relay, they can choose whatever they want to do with that relay. So they could choose to put a censorship in there or try to filter out certain words. But then at the end of the day, if people don't want censorship, then they can just connect to a different relay. And so it's really nice because instead of you being reliant on one source and that one source being able to censor or not, you're connected to multiple different sources. So you could imagine, say something like InfoWars, they're banned on every platform under the sun. And you could even have them banned on Nostr, right? 3 out of the 4 relays, they banned them. But there's the one that you can connect to and you can still get content.
Got it.
So
that is protecting free speech in a way that you can actually say things. And I guess it's protected by the decentralized protocol, right?
Exactly.
But I guess the question is how does that pass through Apple's App Store review guidelines?
Yeah, well the guy so it was interesting because the protocol itself doesn't need to go through the guidelines, but the iOS app built on top of it does.
Right.
And so the guy who was creating the Damus app, he went through the review process probably 6 times because they kept rejecting him again and again because they're like, oh well, you need to have a way to be able to ban people or to be able to censor certain things. He's like, well that's opposite to what this whole protocol is about, right? So what he ended up doing was he made proposals, or I think he wrote code to the underlying protocol to allow for people to be able to ban certain people or be able to kind of, if they on their individual feed they don't want to see certain information, then they can stop that from showing up. So they can filter that out. So I think that was the compromise that he made with Apple. It was also banned in China, so the CCP removed it from the iOS App Store. So obviously, it's not everywhere in the world. But even if you're in China, as long as you can get access to a web interface, you can still access Nostr. So
I guess the one thing that's kind of considering, does that kind of mean that you'd get that self-confirming bias of everyone's kind of picking their own relay based on what's allowed in that relay itself? Like everyone that's very right wing would go the way you only watch Fox News, the way you only watch. Is that something that can happen from something like this or no?
I think what's more likely to happen is there'd be echo chambers from following, which is the same thing that happens in traditional. So it's probably not like so much at the relay level, because the majority of relays, at least right now, are probably not going to be are not censoring anything.
Okay.
So everything's allowed. But it's likely that if you start having folks follow certain people, you're going to have an echo chamber, just like you have in traditional social media. So
right. Yeah. But I guess what it does is it protects the data security. In terms of like we had this discussion about if Twitter goes out of bankruptcy, if it goes out of business, like where will the underlying data be? And I think we talked about a couple episodes ago. Like someone was concerned about like the data being lost if Twitter is going out of bankruptcy. I guess it wouldn't happen in this case. Your data is stored there forever, as long as there are people running the protocols.
Exactly. Well, it's run by like the different relays. So each of the relays has a copy of all of the events that they're kind of relaying back and forth. And so even if one relay goes down, you have three others.
Okay.
Which is really, really nice. One of the weird things about it is you can't really upload images to Nostra. You actually, what you do is you upload your image to like IMG GUR or whatever.
Yeah, I'm GUR, whatever.
I'm GUR, whatever it's called. And you upload it there, and then you post, and it has like it kind of embedded within Nostra.
I see.
And so it's unlikely. So okay, obviously if I'm GUR like takes it down, then your image is being censored by them. But you could just host that image on your own website, and
link that
and embed it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so there's not really that worry about that part being censored. Like you can find ways around it. So
okay.
Yeah.
So like, where do you think the words like the biggest differences it has from like Twitter users? Because I guess adoption is like a huge thing, right? Like how are people adopting it right now? I guess it's early, like Web3 enthusiasts.
I think it's actually there hasn't been so much Web3 in it. It's been more focused on Bitcoin Lightning. Actually, has been integrated into it, which is really phenomenal to see because. Essentially, you can go on the app. You can create a Lightning invoice, right? And then you can pay it, right? Like and then the payment goes through instantly, right? So it's like actually Edward Snowden like recently got on Nostra and he was talking about it. He's like, wow, this is magical internet money. I can't believe this, right? Like this is how like things were supposed to be built, right? So there's beautiful integration that's been built like in with like Bitcoin Lightning Network, and so I think that's where the primary like thing is going to be. Like you can tip people for this. You can put a Lightning invoice right in the event that you post.
Yeah.
So I mean, we'll see what happens. It's become very, very popular in Hong Kong recently, which shows that. I mean, obviously censorship is very important to them, and so to have a way to have encrypted chat as well as a way to push events out that are, not being censored, I think that's really huge and really cool.
And then I guess like one question, like I know one feature of Twitter that's kind of important is when you see somebody that said something like you kind of like, you can like message them like directly yourself and like have a conversation. Is there like some kind of a feature like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's encrypted chat actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so it's cool actually how it's set up because essentially on Nostra what you have is you generate. It's kind of similar to Bitcoin where you generate a private key, right, and then you're able to use that private key for all of your Nostra related activity. So it's kind of the same way of like manage your keys for Bitcoin, manage your keys for Nostra, right? And so that's why the Bitcoin community has been very like it's a very easy tradition. If you're a Bitcoiner, you want to use like this social media, it's super easy, you know.
Exactly.
And so and you have the same thing as encrypted chat. And there's actually like a new bounties webpage that allows you to like. There's one on there like redesign the Telegram interface to use Nostra for like encrypted chat essentially. So very, very, very cool to see.
Yeah. I guess one other thing I think is really great is like it's not really related to censorship, but like the privacy of your data, right? Because like no matter where you are in the world, I'm very aware like there was some reports last year about the U.S. government essentially subpoenaing Twitter, Facebook, and Apple. So things such as your tweet history, who you're DMing, the content of your DMs, including with Apple, your iCloud information, your iMessages are all subject to like the FBI enforcement and the CIA. They can read all of that through like a national security apparatus, like a court, secret court system, right? So even in America, which I'm sure Canada as well, you have those systems where it's actually readable. But I think the one thing I know about Signal is that it got subpoenaed by the U.S. government multiple times, but there's really nothing they can give because they don't have ownership to that data. So they got subpoenaed and they just gave them like a blank paper. That's what's in it, right? Essentially, there's nothing else. They do have the phone number of the person registering. That was it.
So, and I guess with Signal, I believe it's end-to-end encrypted. And then, do they even keep the encrypted data? I don't recall whether they keep the encrypted data. Because you could make the argument that if they, encryption has a shelf life, right? So if they're keeping the encrypted data, then they could be subpoenaed, and then they give them the encrypted data of the particular user. But if they don't even have that and it's end to end, then they don't even have that.
I believe it's
information.
end to end.
Yeah, so that's huge, right? And it's beautiful that like that has been created. Do you guys know the story behind like Signal? I believe he was working on like what's the one that's owned by Facebook? Not Messenger. Yeah, WhatsApp. Wasn't he working on WhatsApp and then
he's a co-founder of WhatsApp?
He co-founder of WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And then he went and founded WhatsApp and then left and actually did was there for a couple of years after it was bought out, and then he went and built Signal because he's like, hey, I got paid, right? and now I want to build something for humanity, basically, and it's donation based. So.
Exactly, yeah.
Beautiful.
And what's funny is he was interviewing at Facebook too to try to get a job there.
Oh, really?
Something like WhatsApp, and they just didn't accept him, and then they bought his company for how many billion?
I think 10 billion.
Yeah,
and they had like 50 people working there or something.
Yeah,
it was a crazy idea. I mean, it is end to end encrypted, but I think every other data Facebook has access to it. Like who's your friends, who's your contacts, how often do you contact them, who do you add, where you access this. So I'm pretty sure like although the chats are encrypted, your privacy it's not. Right, unfortunately. So that's why they created Signal, which is pretty expensive to maintain if you think about it, and it's purely based on donations and nonprofits. So, is that alternative, like a Twitter alternative, also a nonprofit or something like that? Is that based on the donations? Or?
Yeah, basically. Well, they were asking like, I think Jack Dorsey was asking, is there a foundation that you guys have? And they're like, no, we're just a bunch of developers. And Jack Dorsey took one day, he looked through all the stuff. And then he started sending out Bitcoin to them, right?
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty insane. Yeah,
that's crazy.
But speaking of which, what's going on with speaking of Facebook? Like, what's going on with Meta lately? What's the latest?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw, like the stock price just completely went like erupted high, and I think what's kind of like showing is Meta's kind of going through a transition where like usually we saw like back in the day. Companies go from being a growth stage to a mature company, right? Yeah. Like we've never really seen that in tech to the scale of like a company as big as like Facebook, where like they're basically now at the point where this is a cash cow. Like they're making so much money. Like they've kind of reached the peak in terms of like the amount of users they can add to Facebook, right? Like they aren't gonna be able to add more. But now what you're seeing is like more of like a mature, like a value company, right? Saying that okay, yeah, we have this much cash that we can create like free cash flow every quarter, every year. And so now you're attracting a completely different type of investor. You know, you have more your activist investors that care about like dividends and like stock repurchases, like any kind of cash distribution to like the shareholders. And so Facebook kind of shifting towards this, like with like their layoffs that have happened. There's like a joke saying that this is the first time where Facebook finally started talking about efficiency. You know, like they're talking about actually like, like keeping like not as much about the metaverse and like growing like different parts of their company and more about like keeping it efficient, keeping a lean company.
Right.
So this is gonna be kind of cool to see other companies that have gone like really big and like can produce a lot of cash, but they don't really have another market that they can like grow towards like organically. And so I think this is gonna be kind of interesting with like all the dry powder coming in. Like we're gonna see a lot of shift going towards like value investing. I think Facebook is gonna be a good like case study for that.
And what was the reason for their stock price increasing? Was it the profitability was higher than people expected?
It was like both just revenue and like the fact they were profitable. Like their revenue like completely blew out the water. I think it was like 56 billion is like in cash that they generated, which is just incredible for like a company, right? And yeah, so that just completely grew their stock out, and like I think they went from like $90 something like back in November when they were first announcing the layoffs, and like now it's almost at $200 their share price, which is almost like more than double. And for a company that big, you're seeing more than like hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap that have been like added to the company, which will be really crazy to see in like the next coming bit.
But I guess to be fair, I guess that's after they lost significant market cap. Like, has it even reached the all-time high yet? Or I don't think we're there.
No. Yeah, it's not even close to all-time high. And I don't think it can get there for a while, right? Because like all the all-time highs we saw was in like a market of free money, which meant that like you could take so much risk. Now, even with like like the interest rates like rising, I think we're kind of like at a peak for like how much you're gonna rise it, but it's just more expensive to like be in the equities market when you can be in the debt market too, right? Like if I can just go to the treasury yield and get 5%, like why do I want to risk it for like a company like Facebook, Apple? They're like the high quality blue chips in terms of growth stock, right? But like the other companies, why do I want to risk that? So like this kind of equities, we're not going to see like the valuations we saw like at the all-time high for ever. Honestly, it could be like possible unless the company itself like proves that they're worth that much.
Yeah.
Through like execution.
And there is a recent change in like there's a recent change in sentiment in the macroeconomics So I'm like, maybe you want to talk us a little bit more about that, because I thought that has like some direct impact into how Facebook's share price also rose.
Yeah, I think that kind of showed like the entire market. There's like been kind of conflicting sides of both. We saw like Jerome Powell saying that, yeah, we're in a deflationary period. I think he mentioned like 10, 15 times like in his speech, and they only increased interest rates by 0.25 when it was kind of expected it's going to be at 0.5. And it's expected there's not going to be too many more increases. I think only one more like increase.
Okay.
If you look at the yield curve right now, it's kind of showing that we've almost hit the peak of like where we think the interest rate's going to be. So that kind of shows that, yeah, we think we like kind of combated inflation, like, you know, like the plane's landing now, right? Like we're going towards like more of a deflationary period. But then the next part of that, which happened like just a day later, was like the unemployment report came out, and like, you know, like usually you see the fact that there's been so many jobs created, like people think that's a really good sign, right?
Yeah.
Like almost 600,000 jobs got created when we were only expecting about 100,000
God.
jobs. But, and like as good as that sounds, what that kind of indicates is that there's less and less talent available for the overall market. So that means that anytime you want to poach somebody, like let's say you're a startup company, right? You know, like, and usually you would like hire somebody for $100,000, and they already have that job for $100,000 at another place. You know, in M&A you pay a 30% premium to get a company. You're gonna have to pay something similar for like to get an employee, right? To get talent. So then like if you're paying them 30% more, that's $130,000 that you have to pay them in salary, which means the only person that gets affected the most is the end consumer. Because the person that started that company, they're just going to have to charge more prices to the consumer itself. And the consumer then has to pay more. It just becomes kind of like that cyclical feature, right? Which is why like the unemployment kind of increasing more still is signaling that there could be like some form of inflation, which again, like no one kind of knows the overall what's going to happen.
Well, I'm curious, like, what does that mean for kind of the assumptions around modern economic theory, where there's kind of this assumption that by changing the interest rates and doing a rate hike, that modifies unemployment, and it doesn't seem to be following what they assumed, essentially.
Yeah, no, like I think that kind of shows like the Fed can control almost everything except like the labor market, right? Like the labor market is gonna be based on like all of economics is transaction by transaction, kind of like the way blockchain is, and like all combined together, right?
Yep.
And essentially, like just because you increase interest rates, if there's just so much money that got put into the system in the past 2 years, more money that got printed in the past 2 years than like in the history of ever, right? Like if you have that much money, there's gonna be people that still want to take risks, that still want to start companies, that still want to. And then there's gonna be companies that have all this cash from beforehand too, that they can pay for talent. Like you know, and I know we've seen in tech so much layoffs because of how bloated tech got, but a lot of the other industries did not get nearly as bloated because like their stocks didn't go up nearly as much during that time, right? And so we're seeing like all Dunkin' still hire people, and like they're still hiring. Like there isn't as much of like a job freeze in some of the other industries that weren't as correlated to the tech side. And yeah, and because of that, we're going to see that like, even if interest rates go up, these companies, their overall business has not been affected as much.
Right.
And so they'll be completely fine. They can still hire employees, and if your unemployment doesn't, it sounds really like negative to say, like unemployment go higher, but it just means that there's less people available, less people can like incentivize leaving, and it's just going to be a cyclical feature from that.
I just want to say the more money being printed in the last 2 years, in the last 100, that's the bull case for Bitcoin right there.
And I guess the question I have is like everyone's predicting we're entering a recession this year, but like the job market, like as I mentioned many times before on the show, the job market performance has been better and better every single month. And where are we on this recession thing? Because when in a recession, unemployment is supposed to be very high, such as a 2008 cycle. Like
well, it could be possible that the recession the real recession hasn't hit yet. I don't know.
Right.
Like a lot of people have been calling for, you know, the recession is coming. Like it hasn't really, like we haven't really saw the effects of what's to come yet. So
yeah. There's an article last week that says about basically like there are many investors are predicting like a black swan event, which I think is actually pretty interesting because it comes down to like the modern portfolio theory. It says that if you just allocate 0.1% of your portfolio into like super black swan events over the past 10 years, your portfolio return will actually perform, I think, 4% better annually.
Really?
Compared with the S&P. Like if you have a portfolio normally that doesn't do black swan adjustments, and if you adjust for black swan, I think it is 4% more. I don't think annually. I think in total in the past 10 years, it would improve 4% of your total portfolio returns just by allocating.
Well, yeah, it can't be year over year because
year
black swan only occurs every 10 years.
Exactly.
So
I guess the one concern would be can like our governments handle black swan events like competently. Like we saw with COVID, like all the responses on like every side of things was like very just like dramatic and very drastic, and we're kind of seeing the effects of that now. So if there's a black swan event like you said like this year, do we know if like our governments can kind of handle that well?
Well, fiat is a 50-year experiment, so
Yeah, I mean, a debt ceiling can very well be a black swan event. Like the U.S. debt ceiling, like it's like people are saying like they should stop it. I mean, I don't think so. I think they're gonna increase it anyways, but probably gonna put up a show for it. So I do think that might be a potential for a black swan event. I just think like, do we really know it's gonna happen in 2023? Right? It's just like a typical time frame. Like unless there's something going on like the Terra Luna collapse in like crypto, no one really expected that. Yeah. But that brought the whole industry upside down. I think maybe something we can see that happening similarly in the fiat currency world. That's gonna flip the economy upside down.
Right. Like what's the percentage chance that the hyperinflation occurs to USD in the next year? Okay,
right.
Probably pretty low.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like Goldman got out of business or something. That will bring the stock market down, right? Like as long as if one of the traditional players collapse, that's it. Yeah. Right? We'll see like the domino effect happening, just like with Terra Luna, with FTX in crypto, and people kind of go, oh, they're unregulated, but there are also financial institutions that are already being like back tested. That's super horrible in 2008. Has to get bailed out by the government, right? Mm-hmm. Will this happen this time around, or is it going to happen somewhere else? So I think that's really interesting in terms of like what's happening in the market. Yeah. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no. If we see that some of the banks had like huge exposures, like in the past couple of years, the way like 08 was, and like like a Lehman or something goes down, like that could trickle down because that kind of loses the consumer confidence in itself, right? And I think that's like. In 08, the government had to literally put like laws that you cannot short, you cannot like short the side of like stocks because of how much everything was going down. You're seeing lines of like hours and hours long. People just want to take their cash.
Right.
But that's gonna like like what Matt said about just like Bitcoin, these cryptocurrencies. That's gonna like prove like a real use case that we're seeing banks are just not competent either. Like,
well, if people go to the bank where they think their money is safe and they can't withdraw, what happens? What confidence does that create? For the banking system and for the underlying currency. We all know that the systems that were being built by FTX are not that far off from the traditional financial system where there is not enough capital to cover what people have originally put in. And so and everyone's only insured up to $100,000. And so it's pretty easy for the entire system to come collapse, start collapsing if everyone just goes to withdraw from the bank.
Yeah. And people should realize, like, when you put your money into a bank account like Bank of America, Chase, TD, your money goes through, you automatically sign up for a money sweep program, that's what it's called. So your money will get swept with other accounts and from other banks in your bank into a money market account. And a money market account essentially means that 99% of the holdings has to be from U.S. treasuries and U.S. government-backed bonds. So what happens if the U.S. government defaults? All that is going to come collapsing real quick. That's just like that's why the government cannot let it happen of a default. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, your money is not really in a bank; it's in a sweep program.
Right. Like essentially, we're on borrowed time, and they have to keep doing certain things to prevent that from occurring. They have to keep printing money. They have to keep the system going. And at what point does that fail? Essentially, I think is the question. And what is the timeline for that?
Yeah, I think a lot of this sparks from the fact that so many of our politicians and people that kind of make these decisions are so short term. Like they care more about getting elected for their next term than like actually seeing fiat's like a 50, 60 year experiment.
Exactly.
No one's cared about the 50, 60 year point, right? They only care about like the next 3-4 years. Like, how is this going to make me look next time like the elections come up? So we're gonna if USA were to go into a like debt ceiling, I think that could. China owns the most amount of debt from USA too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so
which comes back to our next topic, macro, like essentially like a Chinese balloon that's happened. I think it's a really interesting topic because like not just like how it happening in terms of the tension between two countries, but like for our listeners who haven't heard of it, a Chinese quote unquote spy balloon was spotted near Montana a couple of days back, and then that created a lot of tensions. And I think the U.S. Defense Secretary announced that the balloon is there, and it rushed the news cycle. So my question is like, why announce it to the public? Because I'm pretty sure it's not the first time that this thing has happened, right? So what are they trying to defect? Is it that they're trying to increase the funding for the U.S. defense because now that's getting pulled a little bit? Is it because Secretary of State Blinken is going to visit China literally on Saturday and the news broke on Thursday? Because the timing is so coincidental. I just don't believe that. It's just like a thing they just released.
Wasn't there like people who saw it like in the air like as it went across and people were wondering what it was? Like was that related to like why it was disclosed?
I would say there are many sightings about like UFOs and other things, right?
Yeah, I don't think. I think it could just be like kind of like when we saw like like anytime you kind of want to like engage like more like a partisan from like like say like an anti-China kind of like sentiment in USA and stuff like that. I think that could kind of be like something like they want to just like start like playing around with that.
Right.
Isn't that insane though? Like the response of humans to a balloon that went off course is fear and they're the enemy, right? Like
right, yeah.
Which just seems insane. Like it was probably just let's be honest, you can get way better imagery of any place on Earth from satellites. It's not like a balloon is with whatever hardware on it is really doing a lot of damage in whoever's airspace. And what's also bizarre to me is they let it go across the entire country and then they shot it down, right? So if you were worried about it and you saw it as a threat, why didn't you take it down as soon as it entered U.S. airspace? So that all seems very strange to me, and maybe that's just incompetence. I don't know.
Yeah, and let's not forget that is the same day of the FBI raiding Biden's home to searching for classified papers.
Oh, really?
So it's around the same day that happened. I mean, not raided, it's searched for his home and finding classified documents. So that has been escalating really quickly. So Biden and Mike Pence. So
is that the same thing they did to Trump?
But they're not raiding Biden's home. They weren't invited or something. Not invited. I think they went. The Biden team volunteered. They went in and searched for documents because the sentiment is so bad. Like how? So the Biden's lawyer found the classified documents, which they have no, like they have no clearance to read those papers. So how can you allow someone who is potentially like a suspect into a crime, let's say that which is what it is? How can you allow their lawyers to search for their premises for unclassified documents, like crime documents? How does that make sense? Like I'm just and people are just very confused about it. I think that's why the FBI is now raiding it. In terms of, but I'm not saying that has anything to do with a balloon, but just like the balloon news happened right a day before the Secretary of State's visiting China is very, very weird.
Well, it feels like there's a certain narrative that's trying to be built, like in the news, and they want to stick to that narrative, and so the news that comes out related to fear or uncertainty or doubt or relating to like particular people or an administration seems to be related to that. And it seems that the media was really trying to push for Biden to get into office, and now it seems that they've shifted their tone in relation to Biden as we like get closer to the next U.S. election. So what's the deal with that? Is that just because he's more senile now and they realize he's unable to run the country properly? I don't know.
And I saw that the Democratic Party just make the changes to the primary rules. Apparently, South Carolina now is number one instead of Iowa for the primary caucus. So I'm not sure that had anything to do with Biden. I don't think so. But they are making changes, and I think there are more people willing to challenge Biden come this like election circle, especially with the papers. Like it's honestly not anyone cares about those papers, but the like we discussed a lot of episodes. It's just very weird in terms of the politics of it. Now they're bringing a Chinese balloon when there's like literally a war going on in Ukraine and Russia. So I just feel like it's weird.
Well, this is unprecedented times. If we have two presidents in a row that are one-term presidents, right? Has that ever happened before?
I can't.
That's interesting. I don't know.
I can't remember anything of it. Do you think like the economy is part of the reason why Trump wasn't elected in the first place?
But I thought like during the Trump time, like the economy was like flowing. Like even when like the Trump Biden election was going on, like the economy is probably the best it's been at the time.
I see.
So
yeah, well, he was there was tons of defamation from the media against him, and I mean he didn't help himself by opening his mouth. But so I mean that's a good question for what do you expect of a president? Do you follow what they do for their policy and their policy is sound and so they're a great president, or do they also need to be a good speaker and not kind of create a media storm around themselves that erodes confidence? And so I think you had an interesting kind of piece of the pie with Trump where he didn't really know how to control, or the media was against him, but first off. But he had policy that enabled for the economy to thrive. But I mean, it was interesting. What was really interesting to me was that the media it was like a media circus while Trump was in, and as soon as it went to Biden, everything quieted down.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, what's up with that?
Right. I think it's definitely problematic. I just think like we have so many issues right now going on with the world. Like we have the debt ceiling in the U.S., we have the Ukraine-Russia war, we have like the economic inflation that's impacting people, that the upcoming like recession, the unemployment rate going down, which is great news. But there's so many things that are happening that needs to be taken care of. Not a Chinese balloon. I just think like the Chinese balloon news that just got like not fabricated, but like just got released by the administration, and the media quickly pick it up. It's like I'm just not sure what they're trying to distract the general public from.
It's like all of humanity is like focused on like short-term thinking, and we need to lower our time preference.
Right, exactly. So
this is an interesting thing related to like one of the arguments for like having a monarchy is that you have like one person in power that is able to kind of think for the long term. Not that I'm for like a monarchy, being passed. Oh, you have this blood, so it's passed down. But it's interesting to have like the concept of a person that is there to be thinking for the long term, and then also have you have your prime minister, your president that is in every 4 years or 8 years that is able to think for the long term, and the people are able to elect. Because how do you keep that balance of like short-term thinking related to election cycles with the long-term outcome of a country? And I think a lot in North America we're very focused on the short term, which is concerning.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because if you look at some of the countries in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, like they're really invested towards like the long term, or even like the United Arab Emirates, they invest a lot towards the long term, right? Like the amount they're putting money in, so that like people come to Dubai for like the tech space, right? Because they want to ship from oil.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is making that one, like, what is it, 10-mile city for like some God knows how much it is, but there's no way you could create something like that in like USA, right? Like because like there's too much bureaucratic like red tape in the middle. You're just never gonna be able to cut through it all.
Right.
But yeah, like that monarchy or having like a centralized state, like you can kind of just say, yeah, we want this, let's do it.
To be fair, on the 1 mile long city, I heard an architect's perspective on this. Like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. because basically you have this place that it's like a huge like desert, right?
Yeah.
And then you have everything along one line, and then once you got people starting to live there, well, where do you expand? Or there's nowhere to expand, and then also you need to pay a ton of money for like air conditioning to have it work properly along that line. So it's like. But I agree. Like in general, like they seem to have been like very long-term thinking, and they have what is their system? They have like the Prince of Saudi Arabia, and he's in charge of the country. Like I'm actually not familiar.
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. Like the prince kind of gets to make the decisions about most things, right? And like that. But with the mile-long city, whether or not it works or not, the fact that they're able to do something like that is kind of like the more telling part, right? Like yeah, honestly, I find it kind of dystopian, if I'm being honest. Like, I feel like I've read like books enough that something like this is just like not going to work out. But they're able to do it. That's the thing that like in Canada, USA, we're not able to see because like experiments, like I was saying a little bit earlier, it's too short term. Like you're more invested in getting elected again than on like the benefit of your country overall.
Yeah, you have the China 2025, you have the Saudi Arabia 2050. What is like some Canada 2050 or USA 2050? There's no plan. There's no vision. Like we're just continuing on as we go.
And if there is, like, it's gonna get changed after when the next party goes into office.
Exactly.
Yeah, like for China is able to build subways at a ridiculous pace.
Yeah.
And yet, here in Toronto, for example, what is the timeline for building Line 5 or Line 6 or whatever subway line it is, and is that going to change with the new government, right? And it's always this kind of question in place. So
I like how the Saudi Arabia their vision is like we're diversifying away from oil, and they're taking actions like signing Cristiano Ronaldo and all those other things that they're doing. Like you can see that there's like progress being made. I can't obviously we can comment on the other things about that country, but I just think on a visionary perspective, I totally agree with you guys. Like the short-term perspective we have nowadays is just like it's too much.
Yeah, no, we're seeing like the World Cup with like Qatar, like all these like countries that have just a bunch of cash from oil. They realize that oil is a finite supply, right? And we're actually running out. Like in the next, I think 50 years, it's supposed to like almost be done.
Yeah.
But they've said that for a long time, haven't they? Didn't they say 30 years ago that it was gone in 10 years? And, but they keep finding more and
Well, Saudi Arabia is buying Lucid Motors. That's the news that just broke last weekend. So Lucid Motors, I think it's something created in 2004 or 11.
So Lucid Motors was created actually by the chief engineer of the first Tesla.
Okay.
And so like he then like branched out, created Lucid, and they kind of want to be more of like a luxury electric vehicle. And so like it has very similar stats in terms of like the performance to like the Tesla, except the part of like actually like the AI that Tesla is able to adopt. And so like Saudi Arabia used to own like a lot in Tesla too, and they kind of like diversified from Tesla and going towards Lucid because yeah they and like one of the like pinnacles in that deal was the fact that Lucid has to make a factory in Saudi Arabia for that. So we're seeing, yeah, like they're trying to invest on the electric side too, which is kind of counterintuitive if you're an oil country, right?
What are you guys' thoughts on EVs in general, electric vehicles?
Like overall, I think one thing we haven't thought about enough is about like recycling of the batteries, stuff like that, because I think 15, 20 years down the line with a lot of electric vehicles, once the battery starts eroding, where are you putting them all?
Yeah.
But
Well, I think the other question too is everyone kind of sees it as the perfect green alternative, but the question is where is that electricity coming from? If you're burning coal in order to get the electricity necessary, then you're doing worse for the environment. And if the car itself is a worse ecological footprint than just a gas car in the first place, then there seems to be this this kind of view of theater, carbon tax theater or green theater, that you feel like you're doing a good thing by having a Tesla, but you need to make sure, where is that electricity actually coming from, or you're working backwards at the end of the day. And so I don't know, it's just crazy that there's just kind of this one narrative that's like green energy at all costs, and it doesn't matter what the offset is, essentially.
yeah, I agree with that. Like one concern that's happened, we see this in Europe a lot right now with like the war that happened. All these countries, like more like Western countries, they kind of just want to outsource all of that guilt. So like Tesla, all these other companies, like their raw materials might be like produced in like a very non-ESG way, right? But Tesla itself will be very ESG, so they can kind of be guilt-free. They're outsourcing all their guilt. Right. Same with like a lot of these countries saying that, oh yeah, we don't do any kind of oil, we don't do any kind of like gas. But then you see like Sweden, like all these countries and Norwegian countries, they have some of the biggest like sovereign wealth funds, where some of their biggest investments are in like oil companies, right?
Yeah.
So the way you created all this money was through like all these like non-ESG components. But then because you aren't directly doing it, you're kind of able to keep your hands clean. And we're starting to see like all this unravel now because it's still happening. It's not that like, oh, it stopped happening. It's just you weren't directly part of it. And like we're seeing people care about like the initial raw materials. How was that mined?
Yeah, it's like outsourcing it doesn't solve the problem.
Exactly.
If another country is increasing is polluting the environment and when you get to stay clean, it's not because you're a clean country, it's you're outsourcing where that's occurring.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre to me too that like what Germany did, for example, where they shut down all the nuclear plants and then basically went and bought oil from Russia, and then you had a dramatic increase in the price of electricity in Germany, for example, and their biggest hope was that there wasn't going to be a cold winter. But if you look at kind of the pyramid of people, you have the elites at the top and the people that are poor at the bottom. Well, increasing the electricity costs, okay, well you can and doing this thing where we're going green, and it's okay to increase the electricity costs in the short term, and too bad for the people at the bottom. Well, the thing is, the people at the bottom, that were barely scraping by, they're now pushed below the poverty line, and so any hope that they had in their lives is being decreased, and they're going to care a lot less about being eco-friendly and care a lot less about the environment. It's like the best way to have the world care about the earth is to make sure that everyone can be rich. And I don't mean rich in terms of everyone has the same amount of money. I mean in terms of resources. If you have enough money to put food on the table, if you have enough money to feed your family, and you have enough resources to have what you want, well, now you start caring about the world, and you start thinking about the next 20 to 30 years. So it's like let's stop playing games, and let's make sure that the average person has enough resources. The average person today has way more resources than 200, 300 years ago, and yet we're making and we've all known that the countries that have the most energy output are the ones that are generally the richest. And so let's stop trying to play games and reduce the energy output of whatever country, and let's maybe focus on increasing the average resources for your average human on Earth. I don't know.
Yeah. I think the best way to do it is like John Rawls, like the philosopher. He had this like thing called the veil of ignorance, where if you don't know where in society you're gonna be, how are you gonna build it? You're gonna build it so like the worst person has a good life, right? And like it can do like all this other stuff, make sure like then care about ESG stuff. Because like the reason why we care about all this is because of like the climate itself, like our life on Earth, right? So if you put that veil of ignorance on, like how is like the person all the way at the bottom gonna be able to like live? and I kind of build it from that, so that like those costs itself don't trickle down all the way to like the bottom class, but they actually get like majority of it's lifted through like the upper class, maybe like the upper middle class too, and stuff like that. Like I feel like too much of the burden goes, and you kind of keep deferring it lower and lower because they don't really get to control. Like it's bare necessities; they need to buy it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the other like thing that's kind of out of place too is this idea. Everyone hates to think about the idea of climate change and the temperature getting warmer. But what's actually way more dangerous is the climate cooling. The number of people, if you increase electricity costs and you need to pay more for heat, for an old person, if you're at an average of 20 degrees Celsius or below, it increases the chance of heart attack dramatically. So you have way more deaths that can occur from cold temperatures than you do from warm temperatures. And so, thank God it's the Earth is warming and not cooling, because we're gonna see less death and not more deaths. Like the number of deaths that you have from heat stroke is way less than you have from an old person being in a cold environment for a significant amount of time and then getting a heart attack. So,
I think the whole ESG thing is it's a thing that's basically. I mean, we talk about this on BlackRock how they're manipulating ESG by outsourcing and then coming back to their essentially like a cycle. So ESG, I think, is a lot of it's a rich people's game. I think there's really not a lot of conversation of ESG happening for most people that are just living their lives normally. There's no calling it ESG, and ESG outsourcing and then coming back so that you can be carbon neutral. It's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Well, what I love it's the elites talking about the climate change and carbon output, and they're flying their private jets to Davos for the World Economic Forum. So
exactly.
You're doing all this gymnastics just to make it seem just to portray that you're doing well when you're literally flying your private jet, which is worse than, I forget how much, one trip on a private jet is worse than, I think, an entire year of, maybe not an entire year, but some kind of crazy
1,000 cars in 5 days or some stupid thing. I don't know
if you book a flight using Google, it actually tells you how much carbon footprint you are as a passenger you're bringing into the world. I think, a typical flight from Toronto to New York, you're doing, 300 kg of, carbon, CO2. That's just how much it is.
Well, I think the other thing, too, when you look at... you have warming and you have cooling cycles that exist in the Earth for thousands and thousands of years. The Earth was much, much warmer during the time of the dinosaurs, for example, which is why you had much larger animals that existed at that time. There's so I also wonder too if we've actually evaluated properly. Obviously humans are contributing a certain amount of CO2 to the air, but what were the historic actual heat levels of the Earth, and what did life actually look at that time? There's I've heard reports of there's a greening effect that's going on with more CO2 in the air, where places that were previously deserts are now able to actually grow plants and stuff. And so I think we need to do more research into what does the planet actually look like with X amount of CO2 or X amount of warming, and how devastating is that? I think one of those things is sea level rise. Okay, if you live in Florida, what does that look like when the ice caps melt, right? and low level areas. So. And maybe they need to be like the Dutch, and they need to make dams and whatever. But I think that's something that just hasn't been explored as much, especially by mainstream media and mainstream science. So.
Exactly. So I think now it's interesting. Let's get into a prediction phase for Netflix. So there is the speculation and the news coming out saying Netflix is going to ban password sharing. And in fact, Netflix has already been trying to ban that. They have a trial program in Chile that's already happening, I think, a couple months ago. Okay. So I think it is inevitable, although Netflix saying, it was just a false posting on their website. But essentially, Matt, are you familiar with how the password sharing ban is occurring?
I'm not sure, actually. What is it? Is it essentially that they're looking at specific IP addresses, I believe, and then if you're in that same IP address, or you're in a different IP addresses, then they consider that password sharing, essentially.
Exactly. IP address, device ID, and there are many other things to determine that.
Wasn't it also they were thinking that every month you have to go back to your home base at one point and log on there?
Exactly.
Which makes no sense if you're a university student and things like that, and you actually have a family account.
Or if you're traveling.
Like my family lives in BC, and I pay for their Netflix, right? What are we going to need to get 2 different Netflix accounts, right? You're supposed to be able to have 1, 2, 3, 4 accounts, right?
Exactly.
Or I guess users on a Netflix account, and so now you're just increasing the burden for people that families that go to university or live apart for a certain period of time.
Yeah, and I mean, the question is like, I mean, they're the first doing it apparently. Like, there's HBO, there's Showtime, there's Crave, there's so many other services. There's Disney Plus. Like, they're all not doing password sharing. Password sharing is not something that's only occurring on Netflix. People do it all the time. Just like, how are they trying to do it, knowing that the impact it has towards like the people who just unsubscribe, right? I mean, Matt, what do you think the consequences of this action will be if it gets implemented here?
Well, I mean, consequences. Well, it seems to me, it feels to me like the reason they're doing this is because they've lost ways to increase market share. They've become saturated, and they don't really have a way to increase market share, and so they need to figure out a way to increase the bottom line. But ironically, what this could what's the worst case scenario for Netflix? It could result in people canceling Netflix, and so. I'm interested to see, does this increase their bottom line or does it decrease it in a form of people just ending up canceling the subscription itself? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think like what's ended up happening is all these other like streaming services that have like come out, they just decide to stop licensing their like shows to Netflix. It used to be that like everything from like Friends, all these big like legacy shows were just like licensed to Netflix, and then all these companies got free cash. They realized, wait, we can make more by doing it ourselves. And you have so many fragmented streaming services that if you actually want to watch all the shows you want to watch, it costs the same as like what cable used to be back in the day. And then so it's just gonna be kind of interesting to see because like Netflix is like losing users, both like a much more competitive landscape, and also they have to create their own like shows itself, and that's expensive. Like like Netflix wasn't originally a studio. Like these Netflix originals, some hit big, and a lot also don't hit big.
You know what has always bothered me is that I start like the first streaming service I ever used was Netflix, and I for some reason I like the interface, right? And whenever I use a different interface, I'm like, why can't I just watch this using like the Netflix player? Right. It almost feels like all of this should have been some type of a protocol, essentially, like basic, right? Like some base protocol for video, and then you have like interfaces that can be built on top that monetize or improve the user experience in one way or another. But the question is, how then is the content monetized, and is there a way to have that content be monetizable over the internet? But maybe there is. Maybe there's a way to, imagine you could have a protocol where you pay per like minute, for example, and you pay using Bitcoin Lightning Network, and that's a new way of being able to stream, and then the whatever interface is built on top is then able to monetize on top of that. I don't know. There's an idea. You build it on top of like BitTorrent or just a torrent like protocol or something of that nature. I don't know.
So Google's doing something kind of like that. Not the part about like monetize through Bitcoin or anything, but they're taking essentially like all these cable companies. They realize a lot of people don't actually watch it on TV, so they watch on their phone. So YouTube just like license that out, and then you pay YouTube TV. And you get basically the same as you get in like a cable package for like a big premium package. I think it's like $100 a month or something. But then you get that, and like I'm sure YouTube gives like a lot of money to his cables in the background. But then you get to watch on the YouTube interface. Like YouTube's something you're so used to. You're used to navigating and stuff like that. Yeah. And I think that is going to be like something that ends up happening more and more as like people start caring about the interface, like because that's the only like real differentiator. If like the content itself is getting kind of similar in terms of quality.
Well, it's unfortunate that like. Something like Netflix they're no longer a technology company; they're a
studio.
Well, they're a studio, like they're a content creation company, and it doesn't matter so much about what their tech look like. It used to be that Netflix was the best tech on the block in terms of streaming, much better than anything else. Now that doesn't even matter, right? And what matters is the content that they have exclusive access to.
Yeah.
So. I don't know. Like maybe we're going to have this fragmentation for a long period of time. Yeah. Maybe some type of protocol is going to pop up in 10 years, and then it's going to completely remake the entire industry.
Yeah. I just want to add on to that. I think HBO Max they had a very shitty app, and I think recent years that the HBO Max has actually become so much more better. I think very close to Netflix. If not, I think if not better. It looks very premium and easy to use. At least on my iPad. I mean, my prediction for the Netflix thing is like. The U.S. consumer sentiment is already going a lot lower, so it means that people are already thinking about ways of cutting costs. And most people sign up for like during 2020, 2021 during COVID lockdowns. Those people are probably just let it slide. They're not canceling it because people don't really bother to cancel their subscriptions. Now I think it's giving them reason to push back and just cancel their subscriptions. Right? I don't have the stats for that, but I know that as a subscription. company, like a lot of your revenue actually made out from people forgetting to cancel subscriptions, just kind of piling on, right? So I think that might be the trigger for people just to end up doing it.
Well, it's interesting too because now if like Netflix goes and makes changes and then that causes people to go and cancel it, well then that's a huge like loss for Netflix. But this all stems from this ridiculous idea that a company is supposed to always grow, right? Like you're as a company, like the goal in the market is you grow, and you never stop.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you just grow and you consume everything on Earth? Like, what is the goal, right? And so it's interesting how that goal of incredible growth at all costs, in this case, could result in Netflix like actually like losing if they end up pushing too hard on a particular thing and it goes the wrong way and backfires on them. So
and that kind of brings back to like what we were talking about with Facebook. Right? We're going to see like this new wave where like companies at Netflix also kind of almost maximize their user base, right? Because of how fragmented the entire market is. Like one thing I've noticed a lot is people like Netflix for 1 month, Disney Plus for another month, based on the show they want to watch and keep going that way, right? So yeah, we're gonna see like these mature companies like Netflix that just become a cash cow, and then it's like like hopefully that's kind of like the way Netflix kind of understand that they're kind of reaching maturity and like kind of change their like business model to be more of like a value company. And
well, I think they need to think about how to innovate, and maybe it's not like as directly to what they've done so far. They need to start thinking of the underlying Netflix as their cash cow, and then expanding outwards to new products. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think maybe the model of like releasing everything at once and needs some improvements to like maximize revenue, right? And instead of like banning password sharing, maybe release your show in like 3 parts or 4 parts.
Yeah, I miss like waiting that week, right? Like
right?
to get the next episode.
Everyone just binge it, and then there's no discussion really about the shows, right? Which I think is missing. Like if you watch an HBO show or something else, like you kind of expect like in the week you're waiting for it, you kind of like anticipate like Game of Thrones or something. Yeah. You kind of anticipate, you kind of build up like okay, what's going on, and it's like a full season that you pass it. I'm not saying Netflix should do it, but that does bring HBO more revenue.
Like House of Dragons, like it's exciting to see, like like for the week you're talking with your friends, like no, this is what's gonna happen, this is what's gonna happen. If you have like all the episodes like right away, like you're not really talking about it. You're not talking about it.
That's a good point. You create like Netflix essentially creates echo chambers of like or not an echo chamber, but I guess just like you're concentrated on one show and now another person's working a different show and nobody talks about the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like when we grew up, like you used to just talk about like the Disney Channel would always have like these like Wizards of Waverly Place like new like episodes come out, like these movies or Phineas and Ferb, like that one movie. I remember everyone talked about that for like the whole like weeks going into it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever talked about like Netflix shows until like I'm already done. And I've just said, yo, this was a good show.
And then you recommend it to someone else.
Exactly.
And then you can't talk about it until they're done the entire thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then at that point, you kind of forget to talk about it too, right? And then you have like maybe one small conversation.
Exactly. So I think, that's really interesting. So let's go to a last topic of the day. Okay. Really exciting. So Soham, you were saying like Google is trying to introduce their own AI to beat OpenAI and ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, like I think like when Google's earnings report's coming out next week, so we're gonna learn a bit more like as like the earnings comes out, because like Google's entire monetization has been through their search feature, right? Like that's their cash cow.
Yes.
Like that's Google. Like that they've almost monopolized. Like Microsoft tried Bing, everyone kept trying, and nothing beat Google. And so now what we've seen is ChatGPT is something that actually gives you a result right away. And so I think everyone kind of knew Google probably had something in the background. And like in their earnings call, they're expected to talk about the fact that they might be releasing that to directly compete with ChatGPT.
Right. But isn't Bing also powered by advertisers? Like, are they just trying to kill themselves? There's no way they're doing that, right?
I don't think. Well, Microsoft owns Bing, and the majority of revenue from Microsoft is not related to Bing at all. I don't think, and so it seems to me like they're looking at how can ChatGPT just be integrated into all of their various products, just to make all their various products better.
Yeah. Like Microsoft's business strategy has always been that they'll create like a product and they'll put it into their own bundle. Like for example, they started like like a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, right? Mm-hmm. And you pay like a subscription for that. Before you just bought the whole thing. Then they started a subscription model and they added more things to subscription. Like Teams, they kept the price the same for that first year. And then next year they just increased that price itself.
Okay.
So then like you start paying like for the embedded like each subscription like separately, but you're paying like a bigger price, and they keep going. So like Bing itself wasn't made to monetize it. They were hoping that Bing could be part of their thing. So if they get ChatGPT inside of Bing, all that's going to happen is they're just going to create an entire subscription model, and they're going to bundle it into that, and it's going to end up charging more for that subscription itself, starting like a year, 2 years down.
What do you guys think this is going to look like? Because I've seen an example like website that actually just had like kind of a chat bot on the side, which is in essence ChatGPT. But I don't think that's actually the end result. Like, I would expect it like somehow it improves the actual like results within the search or gives answers to what's actually being indexed. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on what that's actually going to look like?
I think the goal should be to create something the way like the Echo or the Google Home is, where it's like it's voice based. Like typing and stuff like that is kind of like was it like archaic or medieval? Like it's like something that's like older times. Like voice has really been like where everyone kind of wants to grow.
Yeah.
But like even like Google Assistant, Siri, all of them, they're not that smart when you want to learn something. Like they're a lot better when it comes to like, oh, remind me about this.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
a task-based thing.
Exactly.
But in terms of like research or like like getting them to do something or like find out information, they've never really been good at that part. And so like with ChatGPT, like that AI implementation into something like these like form factors, like a voice-enabled one, I think that's what's going to be like the next wave.
Yeah, I think like for example, like a personal assistant use case is that you can actually train OpenAI's like a model to conduct certain things like arranging calendar meetings according to your likings. I think as long as you have enough data to train it, I think it should be easy.
Yeah, I think the concern is going to be related to privacy, right? Like people, like that's why I don't have a like any voice-enabled kind of tool at my house. Is like I don't want like even though I know that they put several processes in place, it's still like it's still a worry, right?
Yeah.
That you're just speaking and it's just picking that up in the background. So it's going to be interesting to see how they put the privacy aspect into the tool that they're creating.
Yeah.
See, I'm the exact opposite because one of my biggest things I hated was just like getting up at nighttime just to turn my lights off and go back to bed. So like I have all that set up in like my Alexa, and then it's like, hey Alexa, like if I just say goodnight, it'll turn the lights off, all this other stuff. So like I think for me something like this ChatGPT enabled would be a lot more useful than I guess for you.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm too tinfoil hat.
Yeah. So okay. I think we've gone through all topics for today. I think it's amazing. I think we went over time as well to talk about everything. So yeah, any last thoughts on everything happening around us, Matt?
Well, are we doing predictions now?
Yeah.
Predictions. Let's see. Predictions. Bitcoin price. I think we're in a bull market rally. We'll see.
Okay.
Price might dump. Yeah.
Okay. So any last thoughts, predictions?
I think for like the actual markets, I think we're gonna start seeing like much more of like an increase. I think a lot of market sentiments on like the positive side. So I think we're starting to see some good stuff on that side.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I'm predicting like a VC bounce back in Q3, Q4 of this year. Just still a long way back, but I'm fully anticipating like a cutback, like a bounce back.
Guess everyone's a bull today.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for you guys and us like having this awesome show. I'm sure there's more things to come in the coming weeks, so we're excited. And for our listeners, please stay tuned. Read our description. There might be ways to reach out to us and have a conversation. So thank you so much and talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, that was
How long was that, yo?
Damn.